Hello everyone and welcome back to Anxiety Chats. Today we are joined with Kezia Williams, who has a master's in forensic archaeology and anthropology, and she's also struggled with anxiety and agoraphobia, among other things. First of all, maybe Kezia, you could tell us what forensic archaeology and anthropology is.
Yeah, so forensic archaeology basically applies forensic science in archaeological scenarios. So it can be a bit dark, but if there is a body, for instance, and it's buried somewhere, right, then the forensic archaeologist would go and excavate, collect all the evidence, basically, that kind of thing, yeah.
So interesting, really, really interesting to be in that field. I imagine a lot of it would go over my head personally, but I think this is the cool thing about the podcast we have right now is there's so many different people with different jobs, different degrees, no degrees. I don't have a degree, you have a degree. It doesn't matter what your background is. You can always experience very similar symptoms to somebody else that you can't relate to on, you know what I mean? It doesn't it affects anybody. It really doesn't matter how old you are, where you're from. And your story of anxiety, I found really interesting. The story you've shared with me, not on this podcast, but I'd love for you to share just now, is your story about university.
Yeah, it all started in my master's degree. At first I did an undergraduate degree, but I didn't seem to develop the kind of anxiety that I had in my master's degree. So yeah, it was a bit unexpected, and I think part of it was just going somewhere new. I didn't really know anyone, and even though I hadn't really had any issues making friends in the past, I think with the master's degree compared to the undergraduate, everyone seemed to be very study orientated. Like they would just spend lots of time studying, which is understandable, but they wouldn't be so keen on going out and getting to know each other as much. So I found that quite difficult to begin with. And then I think also just having a course at a higher level, and I felt that there was a lot of expectations on me. I think a lot of them I put on myself, to be fair, but to perform well, I had done well in my undergraduate degree as well. So I felt like I had to keep that off, and it was quite difficult. The course was difficult, and the lecturers kind of expected people to come in with a high knowledge of the topic, even though it was kind of a conversion for many people. They hadn't really studied it before. So I found that quite difficult as well.
Would you say you're somebody that is like a perfectionist?
That's a hard one. I would say I definitely didn't used to think of myself as a perfectionist, but I think after going through therapy and reflecting a lot, I think I definitely do strive for perfection. Probably more than some other people. And I think with that, you know, there's a lot of unhappiness as well, feeling like you can never achieve this far off thing because as soon as you achieve something, for me at least, I get that kind of instant gratification. I feel good for maybe a few hours or a few days. And then I just feel like, okay, what's the next thing I have to do? What's the next thing I have to achieve? So, yeah, I guess maybe I am a perfectionist.
Yeah, we're uncovering things on the podcast.
Yeah.
So during university, you started to experience anxiety on a more severe end of the scale, and you started to experience maybe kind of agoraphobia type symptoms. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. Just before I had Christmas break, I think the stress of my course and feeling a bit isolated and away from home, it all seemed to build up, and I had a panic attack just after Christmas. And I didn't know it was a panic attack at the time. And when I went to hospital because I thought I was dying, I think many people experience that. And they just said that they thought I was just sick. It was just raised white blood cell count. So I just assumed that they were correct and went home. And then about a week or so later, I had another one, the same sort of experience with very lightheaded, was sweating and feeling sick, headache. I feel like I couldn't breathe, you know, all of the classic symptoms. And I went to hospital again, and again, they said the same thing. They said my white blood cell count was a little bit high, so I was probably just sick. And actually, it wasn't until my grandmother spoke to me, and she said that she thought I had had a panic attack, which I found quite crazy, that the doctors didn't even suggest that it was my grandmother, but I was very appreciative because then I knew what it was. So when I went back to uni after Christmas, I think the weight of everything and having these panic attacks really started to affect me. From coming from no panic attacks before Christmas, I suddenly had one, and then one the next week, and then one a day, and then 5 a day. So it was a lot. And I decided, okay, I need to speak to my lecturers about this. The university, well, I expect them to be supportive and see what kind of accommodations they can make for me. Because I think that's perfectly reasonable to ask. And so I told my tutor, I told my lecturer, and I was very open. I said, I'm having panic attacks. I'm finding it very difficult to get to class. Sometimes I would get to class and I would just feel a panic attack come on about 2 to 3 minutes into the lecture. And I felt like, okay, well, I have to leave. I can't deal with it. So I would run home, and then I just became kind of housebound for a few months. And it got to the point where I felt like I couldn't even go into my kitchen, like going into the hallway and into my kitchen away from my bedroom was just too far. Which is very difficult and very, I think the progression of it, all, you know, moving from me feeling like I can do anything and everything to just feeling completely debilitated by anxiety is very tough and a bit of a shock to the system, I think. My lecturers were nice, but they kind of reiterated or said to me that, oh, there's no pressure, just try and calm. And I feel like I don't really always understand what they're trying to say when they say that, because it just makes me think that they don't really know what I'm experiencing. Because if they were experiencing the same thing, they would, you know, likely react in the same way, and they wouldn't say, oh, just try. Because it's such an effort. Everything that was, you know, is kind of considered simple, like eating, going outside, you know, looking after your hygiene, everything. It just becomes like, instead of from something you don't really have to think about or something you think about for a second, I suddenly was thinking about everything, and it suddenly had everything had 100 steps to it. So I was trying, it's just they couldn't really understand that, which I found quite frustrating. So after I spoke to them, I went and contacted the disability service and the counselling service at the university as well. And I wasn't exactly sure what the disability service could do at the time, but the counselling service, I thought, well, the you know, professionals, and they probably deal with a lot of people experiencing anxiety and everything that comes with it. So I managed to book an appointment with them quite quickly. And I went to the appointment, and the counselor was really nice and, you know, kind of supportive with her words, and she gave some suggestions about sources to go and watch or read, and I did really appreciate that. But she said to me that the next session I would have to wait 8 weeks for, and that just really, really upset me. I feel like the onus is on the sufferer, unfortunately, to reach out and try and get support. I don't think it should be that way, but I think it is. But even when I go to the lengths of trying to seek support, it still isn't regularly available, which is very difficult to deal with. So I was pretty disheartened by that. And I went to the disability service, and actually the day of my meeting, they said they couldn't do a meeting over the phone. And so I was like, okay, I have to walk to the actual disability service centre. So I asked my housemate to walk with me. And when I got into the meeting, I had a panic attack right in front of her, and like right in front of the disability service worker. And I mean, that's a perfect example of this is how it's affecting me. You can see how, how bad it is. And she was supportive in terms of she listened to what I had to say, but she kind of said, well, there's, along the lines of there's only so much we can do. And she gave me a recording device, and she said, why don't you take this to lectures to record them? And I was trying to explain to her in a nice way, well, if I could make it to the lectures, I wouldn't need the recording device because I would already be there. So I found that, again, quite frustrating. And I think just with the agoraphobia in general, just not being accommodated for. So I got given an assignment where I had to go into the lab on campus, and I didn't live far away, but when you have agoraphobia, it doesn't really matter how far away you live. Anything, going outside is just, too much. I was told I needed to go to the lab to measure a bunch of samples so I could create a report, and it was a report that made up quite a significant portion of my grade for that module. Unfortunately, I contacted my lecturer, who I'd already spoken to previously, and said, well, I don't think I can get into the lab to do this. I really can't leave the house at all. And again, they were saying, oh, there's no pressure. You have a whole month to come in. Like, just come in anytime you feel good in the month. And I was, trying to explain, well, I'm running 5 panic attacks a day. I don't feel good pretty much any of the time. So it's just not really an option for me. Quite surprisingly, I suppose, I was put on a specific box with a partner, someone else, and they were having the same kind of issues that I was having as well. And they were finding it hard to leave the house. And we were explicitly told you're not allowed to go to the lab at the same time as your partner. So when we're trying to coordinate, but in the end, I just didn't go, and I sent many emails to lecturers, kind of the head of the department, and the disability service as well, just saying that, and attaching my doctor's note, because I did manage to go to the doctor, and saying, well, I'm just not able to do this, and the stress of knowing that I'm going to fail is making me feel quite suicidal. And I didn't hear anything back until after the assignment was due, which was really difficult. I kind of felt so trapped because it was a degree I was interested in and I wanted to do, but I just felt like there weren't any kind of accommodations put in place to help me get this degree. So I was having to do everything myself and struggle alone. It felt like pretty much struggling alone. And I had even gone to the lengths of asking my lecturer if I specifically said, is there a way that I could get the information, either someone else collects it for me or I get given a different kind of assignment and I can just do it all from home, because I want to do it and I want to show that I'm really trying on this course, but it's just the difficulty of actually getting there. And they basically just said no. And I was pretty upset about that. So I did fail that assignment and I applied for mitigation. Actually, I applied for mitigation for 2 assignments. The second one was a presentation based on the report. And of course, I failed the report, so I couldn't really do the presentation. But I tried to, again, show I'm really trying to succeed in this degree. Like, I'm really trying to get through, even if I'm struggling. So I produced a presentation that was quite vague. I knew it wasn't really up to, grading standards. I thought it'd probably be a fail or a very low grade. But I did it with a kind of thought process that if I show I'm trying, if they'll give me mitigation to redo it when I'm feeling a bit better. And also I've done the other assignment, which I would have got mitigation for, so I can produce something, up to scratch. And I got granted mitigation on the first assignment. They said to me, whoever it was that failed and had to resit it, they said, so the redo assignment is, because this is now during COVID time, so the university shut down, they said to me, okay, well, this new assignment doesn't require you to go anywhere and measure anything yourself. It's just, we've provided you the information and you analyze it. And I felt so frustrated reading that. And I felt like I had essentially begged them to do the same for me when I was really experiencing the same limitations of not being able to get somewhere because of, a health condition. And I just felt very disheartened, very upset. But I did redo that. And then the presentation, which I had explained to the marker at the time that I hadn't been able to do it properly because I hadn't done the report it was based on. They said to me, well, essentially, too bad. You didn't fail. You just got a very low grade. So you don't get to resit that. And of course, I was really upset about that because it felt to me I could have given in nothing, not even shown that I tried to do anything, and I would have been given the opportunity to resit it. But by me trying to show that I actually was really trying to stay on this course and trying to, get this degree, and I was kind of, to me it felt like I was being punished. It was quite an upsetting experience all around.
Honestly, this is like, your story is the perfect example of anxiety and being like, people with anxiety and agoraphobia and panic attacks are completely capable, intelligent, creative, interesting people that have so much to offer the world. You were interested in the subject. You wanted to learn about it. There was something that was getting in your way of that. And I kind of think that the number one thing that makes people worse when they have anxiety is pressure. And for you knowing I can't, if I don't go in there, I'm going to fail or I'm going to get a really bad grade, I imagine that made you feel a million times worse. But the most frustrating thing is seeing like, we are human beings with very, very capable, we're so capable in so many ways. There's one part of us that finds it difficult to do certain things. That's it. That's all it is. And I'm really glad you got in touch with disability services, because I often think like, can I call this a disability? Is that offensive to people? But also it is a disability because it's something that makes us unable to do certain things, disabled, but it's so frustrating that the place where you're meant to go, like disability services and therapists, aren't always people that are in the know. The place where you're meant to feel understood and heard isn't always the place that you do feel understood and heard, and that's just not okay.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think I was, I had very fortunate circumstances in being able to access a private therapist, and I know that's not an option for everyone. So, I can only imagine if I had that removed, like what kind of position would I be in, an even worse one. So I was very upset about that, and I did make a complaint about everything I had experienced, and it was a very long, drawn out, and frustrating, to be honest, very frustrating process. At every point, kind of rising through the ranks of the complaint, I was told, well, you were given all the support available, everyone tried their best. And I understand that they tried to do something, but it just wasn't enough, and they should have recognized that more could have been done, really. So
Yeah.
my complaint went all the way to the top, well, pretty much the top. And they just reiterated the same thing, sorry. And then they told me that it couldn't be considered by the special university committee because I hadn't done something in my complaint, some sort of thing which had never even been explained to me. So that was frustrating as well. And so it caused a lot of extra stress. And then eventually, it maybe took about a year to go through all of that process. And and that was probably when I started the complaint, 6 months or so, maybe a year after I got the actual degree. And by that point, I thought, well, I feel like, maybe there's a case for disability discrimination here. And I just wanted to see if it was something that, might have applied in my circumstances. So I contacted some lawyers, and they told me basically that I was out of time to do that anyway, which was really frustrating because I followed all of the internal processes of the university. It wasn't my fault that it was like a very drawn out process, and then it was just, at that point, it was too late to do anything legally.
I think that's like unbelievably frustrating, and something that's like, I think people see people with agoraphobia and panic attacks as like, well, you can physically do it. You can physically go into the lecture hall, and it's almost, you're like, yeah, and your point is, yeah, I physically can walk, if that's what you mean. Yeah, I can. But like, the actual frustration of somebody suggesting something like, why don't you take a recording device with you, is completely like, how on earth is that going to help? What are you actually talking about? It's so annoying. And I've had a few experiences like that at school. Like, I believe I could have done really well at school, and I didn't do well at school at all. I got C's and fails because I was beside myself with panic every day. And they were just kind of like, well, no one likes school. I was like, okay, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying I can't be bothered. They kind of view it sometimes as like, well, you just can't be bothered, or they just really don't see it as they'd see other disabilities. And that is unbelievably frustrating. You kind of wish they didn't suggest anything rather than suggesting something like, why don't you take a recording device with you? Because it's like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think when you're making those kind of suggestions, if you said nothing, I would go away feeling like, oh, okay, maybe I didn't get the help. But making those kind of unhelpful suggestions, I just feel very dismissed as well. So not only didn't I get the help, but also I felt, kind of a judgment almost, which is just, not what you need.
I'm also so happy to hear that you took it further and you were like, actually, I was mistreated in this situation. Because I think people often think about people with anxiety as quite meek or quite timid and shy, but actually that's not the case at all. We can definitely stand up for ourselves. We can be quite feisty and quite sassy. We can be very funny. It's not all like the same, like really shy person. Sometimes it is, and that's fine too. But I've complained about a lot of things to like people that should have treated me better. And it's not always social. Anxiety is not always social. And so I think that's really cool that you brought that up, because also, even if it might not have helped in the situation, you never know when that could actually be the catalyst to them doing something that would help another agoraphobe in the future, which would be really nice to think. There's like an agoraphobe coming after you that's got help because of you.
Yeah, that would be brilliant. I think I find it so frustrating that I hear, in the news a lot when, unfortunately, students have committed suicide or, dropped out, but you usually hear about the suicide, stories with people with anxiety and them just not getting the support from the universities that they needed. And it's just so upsetting because those people could have been saved. And I just can't understand. Yeah.
You're right. There is actually enough, like there's a lot of information now, and people with anxiety and depression and all various mental health illnesses, there's a lot more open conversation now, and people are actually saying, I'm telling you the things that would help me. These are the things that would help me. I'm not asking you to guess. This isn't rocket science. Like, there's actually sometimes it's hard to know what would help, but sometimes things like, well, could somebody else record in the class while I'm not there? That's a very simple solution to one specific aspect of that problem. There is solutions, and it's just that people, for whatever reason, there's legislation and there's rules and there's these things. And other people's not allowed to record or whatever it is. It's not just about agoraphobia either. It's about each individual human being has different needs, and that is okay. And how can we look at each individual case and be like, what could help this one specific person, rather than like a one size fits all?
Yeah, I think that's something that I find quite frustrating about my course, and kind of what they said to me in the complaint, that basically saying, well, with this specific course, you have to go places, you have to go and do whatever you need to for the assignment. It's very, face-to-face interactive, or that kind of thing. And, from my perspective, it's like, well, I couldn't have predicted that I'd started having panic attacks halfway through the year. So, I mean, it's just really unreasonable, to be honest.
It is. And I'm curious to know, because am I right in thinking that right now you're actually in your place of work, you're not at home?
Yeah, I'm at work at the minute.
So there's been a development, if I'm right, that you can, there's more that you're able to do now. So how did that come about? How did the journey there begin?
It was a long journey, and I went on some medication for a while, and it did help to some degree, but it also, unfortunately, I don't know if it's rare or not, but I had quite graphic nightmares every single night I was on it, which, kept up the panic attack, so that wasn't great, but it did help me go out a bit more. And I managed to get this job quite spontaneously through, I went to the job center and they said, well, there's a job spare tomorrow, why don't you come? I was like, oh, okay, I'll just quite, straight away, okay, sure. And I went, and they just set up a random interviews. I didn't know anything about the companies because I hadn't been told anything, and they just said, okay, go and interview there. And that was quite difficult, anxiety-wise as well, because they would say, oh, why do you want this job? What do you know about the company? And I'm kind of like, well, I'm a good worker. I don't know a lot about the company. But 4 of them said they wanted to interview me again, and 2 of them offered me the job, actually. So I was quite happy about that. And I explained to my boss that I had quite severe anxiety still, and she was very understanding. I still take days off when I have anxiety, and she's like, that's perfectly fine. She says that, she understands that it's difficult, and she's just very understanding and supportive of me, trying to get back into work, because it's not easy. And then I think the exposure therapy aspect of it as well. I was very nervous coming here at first because I was still, dealing with agoraphobia. And the first 3 weeks or so when I came back were very difficult. I was having panic attacks at work even, but I managed to, kind of sit through them, and then gradually over those 3 weeks and, until now, it's become easier to just stay here and, start to feel safe here and feel supported as well. Yeah.
That is incredible. That is such a nice end to the story that, you've obviously experienced so much anxiety in your life, and anxiety is no joke. Especially panic attacks, it really can be unbelievably debilitating. And you are now, not that working matters. If you can't work and you're listening to this, that really does not matter. But it's just great to see that you have sat through those panics and you've made yourself feel more comfortable there through a lot of hard work. And so I feel really proud of you, Kezia. Like, you've done so great.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. It's been so nice speaking to you and hearing your story. And if any of you listening would like to come on like Kezia has, it's not as scary as you think. I would love to chat to you. But if not, we also love hearing your anonymous stories that we can read out in the podcast. So go to the description of wherever you're listening to this podcast, and I will see you again next time for a new episode. Bye, everybody.